Hi, and welcome to IBM Developers Online Meetup. My name is Lisa, and I'll be your host for today. So for those of you who are new to IBM Developer, we are a team of developer advocates from IBM in the Bay Area, and we host free online and in-person meetups, lunch and learns, workshops, and other developer education events. So joining us today is Max Katz, our Program Director of Developer Advocacy at IBM. And we'll be talking about serverless, a new way to build modern applications. So a couple of guidelines for today. So feel free to use the chat window to say hi and discuss topics relevant to the meetup. And if you have any questions, please post them in the Ask a Question section in the bottom of your window. And our team will get back to you with an answer. And we also have Q&A session at the end as well. Now, this online meetup is recorded, and the replay will become available immediately after the event ends. So check us out at our meetup page, IBM Developer SF Bay Area. We'll be posting the link to the video in the comment section of the event posting. And you could also ask a question or reach out to us directly via meetup messages as well. So before further ado, let's get started. Max, go ahead.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Let me share my screen here in just a second. All right, and let me go into presentation mode. All right, so again, welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. So this is going to be a short session. We'll, 30 to 40 minutes. I know you guys are busy. So again, thank you for joining us today. And we'll talk about serverless and, a new way to build modern applications. And my name is Max Katz, and I'm the Program Director for Developer Advocacy at IBM. And you see my email there, my Twitter, and my blog. So please, don't hesitate to send me an email or ping me on Twitter if you have any questions. And again, I mean it. Any comments, questions, please send them to me. So the plan is, again, we'll talk about serverless, and again, why we think it's the modern way to build modern applications. We'll look about benefits, use cases, things you should keep in mind. I have some resources to help you get started, and then at the end, we will do a quick demo. But first, I think the serverless name kind of sucks. And what I find interesting is that every talk to you, if you go to a serverless talk at a conference, then basically every talk starts, well, they are actually servers, right? It's just someone else's servers. And it's kind of interesting. It's a very common for a talk to start that way. And also, if you see this picture from Office Space, right? They're smashing a computer. You probably walked into a serverless talk. So I find this kind of interesting. That because of the name serverless, people still have to say, well, they're actually servers. But anyhow, so I think most I guess resources or maybe people they define serverless as functions as a service or cloud functions. And I actually think it's an approach to building modern applications, and it consists of two things actually. You get APIs or managed services, and the second is functions as a service or cloud functions, or just functions. And notice I have a star next to modern, and the reason is obviously the concept of a modern application it sort of changes all the time, right? So maybe yesterday and today it's containers, and then before there was something else. Now it's serverless. And then tomorrow it's going to be something else. So this way we don't have to come up with a name each time. We can just say we're building our application using a modern approach, modern technologies. And then of course, once something new comes up, we can change the components of the modern application or the ingredients of a modern application, but just keep using the name modern. So I think it's a good name. Maybe it's not as sexy as serverless, but again, we can continue using it for a long time. So first, I'm going to give you some examples of APIs and managed services, and I'm pretty sure most of you have used some of these or at least heard. So these are services that have been available for a very long time. So for example, if you want to use a location, you can use Google Maps API. If you want to manipulate images, cloud area. For authentication, you can use Auth0 or Okta. For communication, Twilio and SendGrid. Now that SendGrid was acquired by Twilio. Stripe or maybe PayPal for payments. And you see some other services. And again, there are thousands of other similar services out there. And again, these are obviously not new, and you've been using them for a long time. But these are APIs, or again, another way to maybe call them, that these are managed services. So again, this is the first component in the modern application that I mentioned. So the goal is, or the approach is, again, because it's an approach to building modern applications, so we should be using these APIs and managed services as much as we can to basically glue our backend together from a collection of providers. But of course, there's situations where we need to write code, and so this is where functions come in. But what's really nice is that now we've been using these managed APIs, but now we also have code that's managed for us by someone else. So it really becomes this a very nice way of building applications. Again, you got the APIs, external APIs, and now you also have code, which is you write the code, but again, it's managed by someone else. And again, so let's dive into more detailed definition of Cloud Functions. So again, it's a compute model where you put your code into a function, and then the function is executed on demand on per request basis. Now, in most cases, it's going to be an HTTP request, right? For example, you have a web application, maybe it's a mobile app, so someone or user clicks a button, and a request is sent, and then your function is invoked. It's very, very standard. But it also has an event-based model, which is really nice, is that your function can be invoked when something happens. So for example, when a database is updated or a push notification is sent. And the third one, periodic, is really nice because you can actually schedule your function to be invoked, every hour, every day, or every week, right? And then your function is not doing anything, and then again, once a week it's invoked to do something. And you can also create custom triggers. So again, the HTTP request where the user does something, right? Again, clicking a button, or there's also an event-based model, which is, again, the function is waiting for an event to occur, and then the function is called. So going back to servers, again, and this is, we're covering benefits now. Again, so the servers are not your problem. So you don't need to provision, maintain, or whatever you do with servers. That's done by the platform or the vendor. What you should be doing is concentrating on the function logic, right, or the value of your application. And that just sounds very similar to when using APIs, right? So from the list of the APIs that I showed you, again, when you use Google Maps API, for example, you don't care about servers, right? You just want to use the API, and the API will work, and that's what's important. But you don't care about servers or who's maintaining the servers and so on. Next one is, this is again a benefit, is that you only pay when your function is running. So your function can run maybe for 10 seconds, maybe for a minute. It can run maybe once a day, once a week. So you only pay when the function is running. So you don't have to pay for servers running 24/7. And again, this is a big benefit because, again, there's no need to pay for servers running 24/7. Now, most providers offer a very generous free tier. So for a small application, it might be that you even not pay anything at all. For larger applications, of course, you'll probably start paying. And there are calculators that I'm going to show you during the demo that you can use to estimate how much it will cost you. And again, going back to the APIs or managed services example, again, most API providers offer like a free tier, right? X number of API calls, and once you over the API calls, you start paying. So I think this is also a very a similar model. So next benefit is auto-scaling. So scaling in general is challenging, right? When demand grows, you need to be ready and be able to handle the demand. So there's a lot of work, obviously, that goes behind the scenes to be able to handle demand. But with functions, that's done automatically for you by the platform or the vendor. So if demand grows, then more functions will be created, and then when demand decreases, basically the functions will basically go away. And a good example of this from retail is like Cyber Monday, right? So if you guys are from the United States, Cyber Monday is after the Thanksgiving holiday, when everyone goes online. I guess people now don't wait for Cyber Monday, but they go online and they buy a lot of stuff, and so the demand increases that particular day. And so with functions, it's a lot easier to handle the demand because again, the platform basically launches more functions and scales automatically. And once the demand drops, maybe the next day or the following day, the functions basically just sort of go away. So that's done automatically, and you don't need to do anything, which is very, very nice. I mentioned providers and platforms, but let's look at the providers in the space. But before we do that, again, so the main three benefits that I talked about is, again, no servers, so you don't need to do anything with servers. You only pay for what you use, right? Only when the function is running. And what you pay is actually, so it's a combination of how long the function is running and how much memory it's using. So that's basically what you pay for. And then the last thing is the auto-scaling. So the providers in the space, we got Amazon Lambda, and that's probably one of the most well-known serverless implementations, and mostly because they were the first ones out there with this feature. And there's ABM Cloud Functions, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Functions, and there are many other smaller players out there as well. The other benefit is that Cloud Functions or functions, they support multiple languages, and you can see the languages that each vendor supports. For example, if you're a JavaScript developer, then every platform supports Node.js. But again, if you're a Python developer, what's nice, then you can use Python and still create functions. So again, this is a big benefit in the sense that you don't need to learn a new language. You can use language of your choice to create, build and run functions. One thing I also want to mention with ABM Cloud Functions, it's you can actually, you've seen Node.js listed, Python, Java, PHP, and Swift, and you can actually use any language via Docker. So again, if you want to use a language that's not supported out of the box, you can actually deploy a Docker container. And one last thing also is that it's IBM Cloud Functions is based on OpenWhisk platform. So if you really wanted to, you could actually launch your own serverless platform, right? So again, that just for your information. All right. Now I mentioned that you pay for how long the function is running and also the memory. So these are the limits, and Amazon Lambda just went from 5 minutes to 15 minutes. And you can see IBM Cloud Functions at 10 minutes, Microsoft Azure at 10 minutes, and Google Cloud Functions in 9 minutes. So this is the longest, basically. That's the time your function can run, and after that point, your function basically will stop executing. So I think even 10 minutes is a very, very long time, right? You should again try and have your function complete in really just a few seconds, if not a second. So again, I think 10 minutes is a very, very long time. Again, for most applications. Another thing, so this is just something you should keep in mind. So another thing you should keep in mind is latency. So there is what's called a cold start. So when the function is invoked for the very first time, it takes a little bit longer for the server to get everything up and running, right? It's sort of makes sense, right? When you launch an application on your laptop for the first time, it takes a little bit longer, or an app on your phone, it takes a little bit longer. So this is the same situation. And so, people look at this as a problem because it's slower. Now, so once the function is invoked, the second time, it's a little bit faster. Now, as long as you keep invoking the function, it will stay warm. And then if you don't invoke it for a period of time, it will basically, the function will go away and it will be a cold start again. So people have some workarounds, like you see there. They have another function, right, that runs periodically that calls the actual function to keep it warm. And I mean, it works. But I think what's really important is understanding the type of application you're building. I think context is very, very important. Because I think if you're building a business application or maybe an internal backend office application, I think, if your application starts fraction of a second slower, I mean, I don't think anyone will notice that. Now, if you're building an application where, or you're sending a rocket into space, where every, fraction of a second counts, then yeah, then probably serverless is not a good approach for your application. So I believe that the whole idea of latency and cold start, again, is not a problem as long as you understand the context and you understand what kind of application you're building. Again, if you're sending a rocket into space and you need super, super fast invocation, then, as I said, serverless is not the best. Going with serverless is not the best approach in this situation. So again, context is important, and again, keeping in mind what kind of application you are building. I also went to a conference, Serverless Conf, in July in San Francisco, and I think in one of the presentations they said, well, so the vendors should have some solution to cold starts. So I thought it was interesting. So we'll see what happens. Some other things to consider. So functions are stateless. So it means they don't store data between requests. So if you invoke a function first time, and then you need to keep, save some data, so it's available when you invoke it the second time. So you should use some kind of a data store or a database to store your information. Other things to consider is that, can you develop locally? So many providers are there. They're offering tools to also, well, in addition to having a dashboard where you can, a console where you can build and test your functions in the browser, also offer CLIs and IDEs where you can build and test your functions. Also, to keep in mind how easily you can monitor your functions. So for example, with ABM Cloud Functions, you can, all the information, log information is sent to Kibana, so you can view that. You want to avoid recursion and long-running loops, is simply because, once you have that, it's you can easily approach the limit for a function. But also, as I mentioned, because you're paying for how long the function is running, so you might, if your function is running for a very long time, you might be a situation where you end up paying a lot more, more money. So you want to maybe set a billing alarm to notify you if your account reaches a preset limit. But again, obviously, mistakes happen, so that's why the alarm will be helpful. But in general, you want to avoid recursion and long-running loops. Security. Again, the first bullet point there, serverless is secure by default because it's someone else's problem. So again, this is something that I heard at a serverless conference, which it sounds very nice, but obviously you want to be kind of careful. But in general, you should follow just the recommended security practices for your application. And again, for example, if your function accesses say, a database, you want to give it the least access needed. So again, I think just regular best practices. Again, not best practices specifically for your application, not industry, right? Because again, every application is different. Okay. You should also try and have a function do just one thing, right? Just one specific thing, because as you're developing your function, it's very easy to do, add more logic, and more logic, and basically it becomes what's called a mini monolith. And this mini monolith is coming from evolution of business logic. So this is again from the conference that I just mentioned, and it shows you the evolution of business logic. So the monolith, this is how we used to develop applications, and I guess some people still do. But it was just one large application, right? Everything together. And then we we broke the application into microservices, and now we're breaking the application into functions. So again, the key is that, as you're developing your function, make sure it doesn't become very big, right? If you need to, you should separate, right? Again, if your function grows too big, you should separate, and then you can actually chain multiple functions into a sequence. So basically one function is invoked, and then it passes data to the next function, and so on. So that option is available. We talked about the other APIs or managed services, and functions by default, they'll scale automatically, so you don't need to worry about that. But of course, the other APIs that you use, they also should scale. And so you want to use APIs from well-known companies, from reputable companies, because again, if your function will scale, but then you call an API that will not scale for whatever reason, right? That's not going to work well. All right. So again, make sure as you're using other services, whether it's a database or any other service, make sure that service also very robust and will scale. All right, so the next thing people usually ask, so what are functions good for? And I think they're pretty much good for many applications out there. And you can see a list here. I mean, it's definitely good for a mobile, web, or a bot backend, static sites. It's really good for automated backups, uptime check and policy enforcement tasks. So these are all, or like background jobs. All these tasks, they don't run all the time, right? They might run once a day, maybe once an hour, maybe once a week, and so on. So these are really good, applications for serverless. I mean, at the end, again, it's anywhere where you don't need servers running all the time. It's can be a great fit. And I think because serverless is such a good fit for many applications, I think it's almost easier to say, well, where not to use Cloud Functions, right? And I think this is a list, and again, I feel like this is easier to just use this. Is that you really shouldn't be using Cloud Functions or just the serverless? Is that when you need a lot of customization, flexibility, and control beyond what the functions allow you, right? Because again, with functions, you concentrate on the code and not on the infrastructure. If you need the process that's going to be running for a very long time, right, over the functions limit. If you need very complex compute and very high memory requirements, and again, very fast response time. And then we talked about latency. So now, obviously, these applications exist, and so if your application, needs one of these requirements, then yes, you probably shouldn't be using, serverless or Cloud Functions. But again, as I mentioned, if you're building an internal application, I don't know, maybe do expense reports. Although I guess you should probably be using out-of-the-box solution. But just as an example. Again, if expense reports, right, if an application starts a little bit slower, like again, we're talking about a fraction of a second, that's not a big problem, and it will be a good fit. But what I really like, I like this one, is that it's really good for prototyping. So let's say you're starting a new project, a new application, and I think serverless is really the way to go. I almost see there is no reason not to go with serverless. Again, unless you know ahead of time that you need these requirements that I just showed you. But it's a really awesome way to start your application, build some functions. You can also launch APIs quickly. You can, for example, once you have a function, you can also, expose it via gateway, make it an API easily. So it's a really great way to prototype and just kind of hack something and see if it works. If you see that it works, great, you can continue with serverless. If you say, you know what, I need more flexibility and more control, then of course you can kind of drop more flexibility, maybe you go with microservices or the container route. But again, I think for many applications, I don't want to say all, of course, maybe even most applications, serverless is a really good way to start because it's incredibly easy, incredibly fast to do that. All right. So that's it for we covered what is serverless. We talked about what is some things you have to keep in mind and what it's good for and what it's not good for. So here's some resources. There are some in the list section. There are resources where they have a bunch of other resources about serverless. There is a very nice newsletter that I believe goes out every Friday, serverless.email. So I highly encourage you to sign up. Then code patterns. So that's from IBM Developer, and a code pattern is a collection of resources such as obviously code from GitHub. It has architecture diagrams. It has kind of simple app and a simple solution, a tutorial and videos. So it's a collection of resources to really make it easier for you to get started, right? You can launch the application, see how it works. You could, break it and then try and fix it and make changes and so on, or maybe use it as a starting point. And I'm going to have a slide at the end just to show you, tell you more about code patterns. And the last link is serverless architecture. This is a great article. It's it's very technical, but it's a great article, kind of a very high level overview of the serverless sort of architecture. So again, I encourage you to read that as well. So one thing before we go into a demo is people also talk about containers versus serverless. And again, this is just a picture that I took at the serverless conference I attended. So it's not really functions or serverless versus containers. As you can see, functions is simply just a higher sort of abstraction level in a way, right? And this slide basically shows you the same thing, is that functions allow you to concentrate on your business, on the value of your application, without having to worry about servers, scalability, and so on. Now, if you do need the control, if you do need the flexibility, then of course you can go with containers. So again, it's not functions against containers. It just really depends on what kind of application you're building, how much control you need. And as I said, I think many applications out there are a very good fit for functions. But of course, there's some applications where you do need more control. Then of course, go with containers or other solutions sort of below functions where you gain more control. Right. The other thing people also compare is the cost, right? So they look at serverless and they compare the server, how it would compare against launching their own sort of servers or containers. And this is a really great graphic that I found, and there is a link at the bottom to the source, but it's a great blog post. Basically, when people look at cost, they look at serverless just purely versus the server cost without, considering all the other things that you see on the right-hand side. Like you would need more engineering hours, right? The slower innovation, infrastructure, maintenance, and security. So you have to keep that in mind because, again, for small applications, serverless cost will probably be cheaper than server cost. But I think once you build a bigger application, it's possible that the server is going to become less, less expensive. But again, that's fine. But again, that's not taking into account everything that's below, right, below the water. So just keep that in mind when you're comparing, serverless to versus server pricing. All right. So we're almost done, and again, we'll jump into a quick demo. But again, I believe that serverless is not cloud functions or functions as a service. I think serverless, and again, the not being the best name aside, is simply an approach to building modern applications. And I think it consists of two main things. Again, we got the APIs, or the third-party APIs, or we can again look at them as managed services, because again, we don't manage, we just use the APIs, and someone else manages the services or the servers and so on. And the other thing is that we obviously still need to write code, and then we use functions or cloud functions to write business logic and write business value. But what's really nice is that our code is basically now managed by someone else, right? So very similar to APIs. So I think once you combine these two, that's what you get. That's what I refer to a modern application. All right. And again, once you can concentrate on the value of your application, and without needing to concentrate on the servers and scaling stuff, obviously that allows you to build applications a lot faster. All right, so now I'm going to jump into a demo, but what I encourage you to do so is to sign up for an ABM Cloud and actually give it a try. And I'm going to build a really quick hello world function for you. If you want to basically do what I'm going to show you, so you can follow this tutorial that I have, there is a link. Again, it should literally take you maybe, I don't know, less than 10 minutes, right, to build this. So I very much encourage you to do that. So let me go into a browser, and I'm going to show you how to build a very your hello world cloud function. All right. Okay, so this is the console. This is the ABM Cloud, and I already, I have already functions open. But if you just, if you log in for the first time, you can go here, and you'll see functions. So let's click on functions. All right, so same page, but there's a lot of information again to help you get started. Again, I mentioned the CLI. So if you want to use, if you want to develop locally, so you can do that. I'm going to use this option because again, I want to build a function in the browser. I do want to mention, if you scroll down again, there's more information here. Oh, actually, I wanted to show you the pricing. So this is where I'm going to go. So you're going to go pricing. And I mentioned there's the calculator. And right here, there's a calculator. And you can see that if I, this is the execution time, right? And this is the memory used. And if I invoke this function 5,000 times, that I'm going to pay 0. And then you can also include this free tier that I mentioned. So let's change this to, right, 1 second. And you can still see that it's free. So if I have a function that uses this much memory and invoke 5,000 times, it's going to be free. So if I change it to 50,000 invocations, it's still free. And again, you can see it here also. Like if it's 1 second and this is the memory using, if it's invoked 10 million times, this is how much you're going to pay. Anyhow, so this is useful just to give you an idea of how much you might be paying. All right, so let's go to actions. And I already have some actions from before, so you're going to see them. Again, if this is your first time, then you're going to see anything. Oh, session. Let me click here. Let's see if we can. All right. Just refresh quickly. All right, so we can click create. And what's nice is that you get some templates that you can use. So these are just basically, you get, your function, from a template, which is really nice, again, to start. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a function, and let's say hello serverless. Even though we don't like the name, we'll still use it. I'm going to put it in the default package, but you can also create a package and put it in a different package. And then the runtime, as you can see, I'm going to use with Node.js, and then click create. All right, so my function is created, and even this function, which is basically kind of a blank function, it actually has a little hello world application. So as I said, this should literally take you, I said 10 minutes, but it probably should take you less than 5 minutes, if not less, to do this. But this is, this is where you write the code. And as I said, if you need to invoke third-party APIs, you can do that. If you need to save data into a database, you would just write code to do that. And then you can write here, you can easily test the function. So we can go to invoke, and you can see that my function was just invoked. Now, just to make some really small changes, let's say we want to actually pass a name. So we can do something like this. Space here, save. And now we can provide sample input, right? So this has to be, so we'll say name, max, right? And when I invoke, we can see that, right? So small change, but I'm able to test the function, all right? Now, you can also as easily make it, expose it as an API, and that's where you go to endpoints, and you want to click here. There's also an option here, but this requires an API key, so we're not going to do it. But let's click save, and this is the public API. We can just copy it and put it in the browser, right? So like this API cannot be invoked from anywhere. Now it says undefined because it didn't provide a name. But if I do enter a name as a request parameter, so name, and you can see that it's right. You see my name. Now, if we want to make another change really quickly, we can go back to the action, or actually code, sorry. But let's open it here. And maybe just say hello. And then we're going to save and go back here. Right, this is the API. And you can see now it's a different, well, we updated the function. Again, super simple. So again, I've never tried serverless cloud functions as a service. I very much encourage you to just try this tutorial and see how simple and easy it is. And again, once you get the hello world working, again, which you'll get in a few minutes, you can now see if you can, you call external APIs and so on. All right. Now I talked about code patterns briefly. So this is a link. So there again, we have a large number of code patterns, which again, as you can see, is like almost like sample solutions or small sample apps to help you get started. I mean, all the code is available on GitHub, and there's usually a tutorial and a video and an architecture diagram with each code pattern. So I definitely encourage you to try. We can click on one. Just to show you. Right, so you can see like there is a diagram of how this how it works, and then you can get the code from GitHub. All right, so that's for code patterns. All right, the other thing I want to quickly mention is I would like also to encourage you to join our meetup. We host online events like this one, but also in-person events very frequently, basically weekly. So again, I encourage you, if you're in the Bay Area, definitely come to our in-person events. If you're not in the Bay Area, you can always join our online events. All right, so let me go back to slides. All right, and well, this is the code pattern slide that I showed you. Again, this is the meetup that I also showed you. And again, thank you very much. Again, if you have any questions about this or really anything else, please don't hesitate to email me, or you can again ping me on Twitter. All right, so I'll give it back to you, Lisa.
Thanks, Max. Would you answer one question that was posted on Ask a Question real quick?
Of course. So the question is, what does serverless look like? I cannot visualize it. That's a good question. Well, so that's basically what I showed you. I mean, I can go back to share you my screen. So let me do that. Give me a sec here. All right. So this is serverless, and I agree with you. I think when people talk serverless, that's why the name sucks. But so this is serverless, right? It's really it's a function that you see that will be executed by the platform, and I think it's obviously sort of a simplistic definition, but that's what it is. It's code that you write that will be executed by the platform, whether it's ABM Cloud Functions, Amazon Lambda, Azure Functions, or Google Functions. And then it will be executed, and then again, from here you can write any business logic you would like. You can, as I said, invoke third-party APIs. Again, so for example, let's say you want to send an SMS message, right? So you would, as an input, you would ask for a phone number probably, right? And a text, and then you would invoke the Twilio API, right? So you've got your managed function, and then you would invoke the Twilio, which is again an external API to send an SMS message, all right? So hopefully that answers the question. And again, if not, don't hesitate to send me an email, or again ping me on Twitter, and I'll be happy to share more information.
Great, thanks, Max. All right, so thank you everyone for joining our online meetup. We host these events because we're really excited about the amazing technology we'll build, and we want to provide you with a great education and tools to do just that. So this week alone, we have 2 more events. So tonight, Wednesday at 6 p.m. Pacific time, we have an in-person joint workshop with Slack in Soma, San Francisco. So you'll learn how to make your bot smarter and more useful with IBM Watson Cognitive Services. And tomorrow, Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, we're hosting an online meetup where we'll be talking about chatbots and how you can give it a personality. So please check out our meetup page, IBM Developer SF Bay Area, to get more details about these events. And that's it for today. So see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.